tell me, do you know who Stan Reynolds is?
Stan Reynolds? No, sorry, I don't know who he is.
Wetaskiwin, 3 kilometers.
No, I have no idea who Stan Reynolds is.
No, sorry, but I think he might have something to do with the museum.
Stan Reynolds, he has to do with the Aviation Museum, but I don't know him personally.
I believe that Stan Reynolds was a genius.
Wildlife hunter and a pilot and an antique hunter and an exceptionally good businessman.
If I had to sum him up, somebody being very much like him or him being like somebody else, I would say him and Howard Hughes could be brothers.
How many articles might you have? Do you have a number in inventory or anything like that?
You know what? That would be a guess for all of us. Is because the sizes range from this small to huge, so it could be 1 million articles.
I know of no other individual that collected to the extent that Stanley did. There's really no holds barred. If it was old, he collected it.
He had the greatest selection of equipment that I think almost anybody in Western Canada has ever seen, and probably as much as almost anybody anywhere.
Who needs 100 thrash machines?
You know, we're talking steam engines, trucks, cars, tractors, Indian artifacts, guns, military units. It really was the largest in the world.
Stan is your classic collector. He's the guy who has the passion for the things that he loves. He wants to go out and gather them from the world, bring them together, and put a part of his history in his closet and keep it forever.
You know, when you can get to a point where you can pick and choose an automobile, vintage, and Stanley can probably provide parts for it, new or used, you're a collector.
The first trade-in of an antique car was a 1911 Overland, which was traded in on a 1947 Monarch around 1948. And that was when we had our car lots on the east side of the railway track in Wetaskiwin. That's one of the first cars you see when you go into the Reynolds, Alberta Museum.
It is still considered the largest single donation from a private individual in Canadian history.
We had on hand approximately 2,000 cars and trucks, antique and vintage, about 1,500 tractors and steam engines, plus over 5,000 pieces of farm machinery, probably over 100 military cars and trucks, half-tracks, tanks, all kinds of items. I would say probably about 30 rare motorcycles and probably 50 airplanes at that time.
And it was all valued out. It was valued at over $100 million, that collection.
Not everybody wants to live in a quarter section full of steam engines and car bodies and trucks and tractors and everything else. And I'm pretty sure that people would have thought he was a little bit of an eccentric. But, you know, who's laughing now?
We weren't really allowed to throw garbage away. And Stan would do random checks in our dumpster to see what we've been throwing away. Nothing got thrown away with him. He'd save everything. And it got to a point like we were running out of room. Every little nook and cranny was filled with stuff. Even something that was worn out, he'd say, "No, I think we better keep it because we might need something off that." So he couldn't do it.
When I got back to my father's garage, he was all set to give me a licking because it was after dark. He didn't know where I was, and I said, "Well, I found an arrowhead," and I showed it to him, and he looked at it, and I didn't get a licking.
Our heritage was rapidly disappearing, like right out of the country even.
The way to save the items that are in Alberta would be start to collect them myself before they went someplace else.
And it wasn't until I was a lot older that I realized that the reason we went for those Sunday drives was so he could go antique hunting.
Stan had a variety of methods that he used. One was he flew around in his own little airplane and spotted things from the air. The other thing is he advertised and used his business as opportunity to say he was looking for these pieces of machinery and artifacts from days gone by, and he would give people opportunity to trade them in, or he could, if he could get information from somebody about an item that he hadn't seen, and he would go after looking it up and seeing if he could find it.
At that time, you could buy tractors and steam engines for pretty well scrap metal price.
He started collecting at a time when most of this stuff, there was no value in a lot of aspects in terms of monetary value, and people were losing interest in keeping them because they were just old pieces of junk sitting on the farm.
So we were able to collect a large quantity of antique and vintage items about 30, 40, 50 years ago that would be very expensive to buy today.
It would seem like Stan was out of his mind a bit in terms of his passion for collecting these types of things, and there was probably people that figured they were laughing all the way to the bank because he gave them $50 for a piece of junk.
Stan was a businessman. When Stan went out to get this material, he always tried to get the best deal possible. A lot of haggling, a lot of different approaches he had.
We ask them what they want for something. Oh, they don't know. Half of them say that, oh, they don't know, because they think you're going to offer them more than what they have in mind. So you offer them a low price. And then, once you offer them a low price, say you offer them $50 for something, and you know it's worth more than that, then he comes up with a price. Oh, hell, that's worth $300 anyway. Then I decide whether I'm going to buy it for $300 or dicker with them if it's not worth $300. But at least you get a price out of them that way.
He often didn't want to zoom in on one piece. If he wanted one piece in a field full of material, he would say, I'll take it all. What's the price for all of it? Because you don't want to zoom in on that one, because they'll go, oh, he really wants that one. What am I going to charge him? He says, I'll take everything. And the materials he usually got for a couple $100. He would see what he had to pay, depending on how much he wanted it. If he wanted it real bad, he would pay a little more.
Stanley, George Reynolds, is not the world's most generous guy when it comes to buying stuff. I've been out with him when we're buying something, and he offers someone $10 for an old tractor or something, and I would have thought, maybe start at $500 maybe, but no. And the funny part was that he'd nearly always get it.
And he was such an unimposing man, always. 5'4", and he would go out hunting for antiques. And if he found things that he wanted, he could negotiate a reasonable price, because at that point they didn't know he was Stan Reynolds.
A Fairbanks Morse portable gas engine. A portable is on wheels, and you tow it with horses. And it was half buried in the straw pile. And I offered the owner $15 for it. And he said, I wouldn't sell a wheel off it for $15. So I said, well, supposing I raised the offer to $20. And he said, that's okay.
What we find nowadays with the marketplace as it is some of these materials are worth a great deal of money. The Classic 6, the oldest Chevrolet in existence. Now I ask an appraiser, I say, what could the Classic 6 go for on the open market? They estimated anywhere from $3 to $5 million.
We were collecting to save the units. And we never dreamt that they would go up in value. And the fact that they went up in value, we got a good price for the surplus units, but we didn't expect that, because if people knew that the units were going to go up in value, well, then we never would have been able to buy them in the first place at a reasonable price.
You give a car a history, and for some reason its value seems like it can drive up in this world that is unexplainable. And he saw something like that before anybody else did, but not in terms of the monetary value, in terms of that heritage value.
You know, it's kind of a prestigious thing to be in that situation. But you know, Stan was never like that. Like he wasn't the type of guy that wanted to show off or brag about what he had. That never happened. He had one of the nicest collections of McLaughlin Buicks in the world, right here. He had the biggest collection. And I was with him at a Red Deer Swamp Meet one year, and this fellow was really into McLaughlin Buicks. And Stan said, rather than to say, well, I've got the biggest collection of McLaughlin Buicks in the world, he says, Bruce here has a nice collection of McLaughlin Buicks. But he never once said it was his.
Most knowledgeable man that I've ever run across, you could ask him almost any question about any machine, and he knew something about that.
Stan had to be an amateur historian. He had to be an amateur sociologist. He had to know all of this stuff. He had to have a little bit of everything in order to understand what he was looking at. And there was one where Stan would understand this stuff, and then as he collected more and more, and he would teach himself this material. More learning, more stuff, more learning, more stuff. And as the collection grew, so did Stan's knowledge.
We're in the Reynolds Alberta Museum Resource Centre, and Stan's collecting went beyond the artifact. He gathered mountains of information about the artifacts, from the technical information through the information that was period information about how you preserve your automobile. Some of it's absolutely fascinating. In fact, that was the basis of what we've got here, and it became an award-winning resource center as a result.
These files can be looked into, and you can see where the vehicle came from and where it was used and how it was obtained and how it was restored, and all of the particulars regarding that particular vehicle.
Every conversation Stan ever had with anybody, he write everything down if it was important. You know, dates, time, didn't matter what it was. He went through a lot of pens.
He even had a file on me in there.
Yeah, Dr. Johnson.
He gave me my file. There's stuff I didn't know about myself.
Other than the odd person would come and think that, realize that something he bought 40 years ago is worth something today, and they'd come and figure as though that they should get more money for it because he didn't pay enough, or they'd say, well, you didn't pay me yet. Well, Stan had a bill of sale on everything.
He has all of this materials that was spread out over acres of ground, but he knew where everything was. If you ask him about something, you say, well, Stan, do you have one of these? And he'll go, it's in building number 3. I think it's on the 3rd shelf on the right. And he will still remember that sort of stuff. And the process by which he acquired all this stuff, all of the different trips he took, all of the different collecting journeys he went on, he remembers these like they were yesterday.
When I saw the car, it was sitting in a bunch of weeds in Pollard's car lot.
Henry Ford and Thomas Edison both tried to buy that car for Henry Ford's museum. The reason Henry Ford and Thomas Edison couldn't buy this car, the fella in Detroit, Michigan, did not like Henry Ford and was not going to let him have that car. Stan came along and charmed him and obviously bought the car. And then, of course, I did the total restoration on that. And it turned out nice. It turned out a nice restoration.
Well, there's a lot of prize pieces. The walking tractor was taken as an example. I was looking for that walking tractor for at least 15 years.
Stan said to me, he says, I missed out on one car I should have bought. And I said, what was that? He says, I missed out on buying Bonnie and Clyde's car that they were shot in. And it was just all original. The documentation was all there, and it was just unbelievable. They had all the clothing there they were shot in. These guys went all out and done it up right. Of course, Vegas does that, But what a tourist attraction. And the car only went for $2,500. And I says, geez, Stan, that was cheap. He said, yeah, but it was all full of holes.
Stan Reynolds? Absolutely. A local businessman in town, owned everything from car dealerships to implementation dealerships, tractors. He sold pretty much everything, airplanes especially. Everything, soup to nuts.
After school hours, I would go down to my dad's garage and start out at a wage of 15 cents per week.
As far as being a good businessman, I think that came very naturally to him, and the ambition.
The first vehicle I ever owned, when I became 16 years old, a fellow brought in a 1927 Model T Ford Roadster pickup and sold it to my father, who's running the auto wreckage, for $14. And it was such a good Model T that my dad didn't wreck it. He said he gave it to me and I could earn the money to pay him back the $14.
With East Wetaskiwin and West Wetaskiwin. He was the unelected mayor of East Wetaskiwin, his father. He's a pretty shrewd fellow.
So I took the Model T, delivered bread to the people in the cottages, and charged 25 cents for 3 loaves, or 10 cents a loaf.
It just never ended, the ambition. He always had to be busy. And money was just a way to go on to the next thing.
When I joined the Air Force, when I was 18 years old, and before I went overseas, I bought a car lot on Main Street in Wetaskiwin. But it was just an empty lot. And I think they charged me $100 for the lot. So I went overseas. My father paid the taxes on the lot and used it to wreck cars on while I was overseas.
Near the end of the war, Dad's idea was that he would retire and the 3 sons would take over the business. Bud, he was willing to go along with this. Stan, he wanted to run his own show, so he didn't want to be part of it.
And then in the fall of 1945, when I got back to Canada, I had to clear all this half-wrecked cars off the lot, and we built the garage because I had to save all of the money that I had saved up in the Air Force to buy used cars.
But it doesn't surprise me that he had $3,000 worth of savings to start his first shop, because he worked so hard at it.
And he had the vision to see that he could set up a business in used cars. He said no cars were built from 41 to 45. Americans came in the war in 41 and they quit building cars. So there's a big backlog of people wanting cars. So everybody's driving old cars, so they want to get trading.
Any cars that I purchased for resale, secondhand car, I would do the work on it myself to fix it up. And I remember one of the first cars that I sold was a 1931 Ford pickup truck, which I bought in Ponoka for $60, towed it to Wetaskiwin, and then I got it running and repainted it, and I had it all finished except for the hubcaps. I needed a new set of hubcaps, and they hadn't arrived yet. And a man by the name of Pierce Doring came in, a farmer from 6 miles west of Wetaskiwin. He came in and saw the pickup and wanted to know what I wanted for it, and I said $325. And he went up to the bank and he got out $325, come back and he bought it right that day.
You bring in your 14-year-old car and I can give you a 10-year-old car. He kept going with that. So I brought my car in. It was a 41 Ford. It was practically new, in 45, 46. But he had a little shop, about 10 by 10, and a dirt floor.
For the first year or two, I had to haul cinders from the railway station, and that was what I used for the floor of my garage. As soon as they started producing 1946 cars after the war, they were rationed to the franchise dealers in Alberta, and they could only get maybe 1 or 2 cars a month. Whereas I would go to buy from dealers in Ontario as 30 or more cars at a time, and I was able to provide new cars for sale, whereas the other dealers couldn't.
It turned out such a good enterprise that he ran out of space on that lot, and so he bought the one next to it, as well as several others through the years.
That was already when Dad had decided that 7 or more locations for all of these car lots just wasn't cutting it. So he had decided that he should build a new building. He acquired the property on the highway.
And then he began his larger operation, Stan Reynolds Auto Sales.
I'm told the grand opening was so big over a 3-day period that 10,000 visitors came. And we were a community of maybe 2,000 people at the time.
His slogan was, you get the best deal at Stan Reynolds Auto Sales. And he used to say he'd take anything on trade. And in fact, he used to take farm equipment and farm produce.
And if somebody wanted to trade in some livestock or furniture, or trade an airplane on a car, or trade a truck on an airplane, we would deal with them.
When they saw a sticker on the back of your car when you stopped to get gas, you could be at Provost, you could be at Wainwright or Lloydminster, wherever you were traveling, and they would ask you, do you know Stan Reynolds? Everybody knew Stan Reynolds. He did a great job in advertising.
My father had the absolute greatest advertising marketer, absolutely. And he came up with the most terrific ideas that I think he was way far ahead of his time.
So go see Stan, he's down at Wetaskiwin, it's not too far.
We proudly present live the Stan Reynolds Show. And now, here's Stan.
The jingle he had for Henry Singer is Henry Singer had a suit that'll fit just you. And then a jingle he had for us was Stan Reynolds has a car that'll suit just you. Then he'd pretend that we were fighting with each other, which we weren't. But people liked that.
He was one of the largest automotive dealers in Canada. He started such things. You've heard of a car bonspiel. That all started with Stan. You've heard of some of the bigger retailers now where everything is on sale. It's this sale, that sale. There was never a full retail day in Stan's life. It was always the boss is away sale, or the bank is going to shut us down sale, or there'd be the freight car of inventory that we weren't expecting sale. There was, our new salesman needs some experience, come and take them to the cleaners sale, and every day was a marketing opportunity to Stan.
One of my favorites is when he persuaded Duke Ellington to come in and play the piano in the showroom.
And he built an enviable reputation. Tough dealer, but nonetheless, he got a good car, and he would make sure he got looked after.
We produced and made up the first lifetime warranty in Canada. This warranty was given with a brand new 1954 Hillman sedan, which was sold to a lady by the name of Hallie Elgert, who lived about a mile east of Wetaskiwin on her father's farm.
What was interesting is he was never in the front lines. He always stood in the background and basically choreographed the operation and let other people run the front lines.
Stan was a fair, honest, and decent fellow to do business with, and fortunately was smart enough to let his creative department of one, which was myself, to do the creative thinking and the humor, and the rest of the business to the back door that led to the backyard, which led to the garage, where Stan was probably there up to his knees in elbow grease.
1950 to 58, for about 8 years, I sold more vehicles than any other dealer in the province.
And integrity, but with economy. And so he was the right kind of a guy to be in the car business.
Over time, Stan left the car business a couple of years later with the franchise. He still sold some cars, and Stan's main concern then was being in the Caterpillars, motor graders, scrapers, heavy equipment.
And again, that little flash of genius he had was that when people buy a very, very expensive, heavy machine, they go for ever and ever, but they need parts. And the main tractor dealers only carry parts for just so many years. Well, Stan would get a great array of parts from old cats from great antiquity, and he'd have the parts. Well, if someone had a 1942 or something cat, the only guy in Western Canada that had the part was Stanley George Reynolds. And of course, proved to be a very lucrative kind of business.
He and his brother, Bud, that were here, the business they were in complemented one another from a collection point of view.
At that time, we had franchise for Mercury trucks, so we had a Mercury winch truck pulling a semi-trailer, and if we delivered a Caterpillar tractor, rather than have that truck come back empty, we'd haul back a steam engine or some antique vehicles.
Once he got that bug, there was nothing I think that would change it. In fact, I think that was part of his wife splitting up.
He would be down at that shop every morning before me, leave at the same time as I did. He'd go home and get back to his desk at home, and he'd work till midnight every night. And that went on for 30-some years that I known him.
One time I ran 7 companies. I had a truck company and an insurance company and an aircraft sales company.
1957, he believed that he was being underappreciated. For the things that he was contributing to the community, he was still fighting battles to achieve the things that needed to be achieved. So to make his point, having been where he would pay all the salesmen and the mechanics weekly, he paid them all in brand new silver dollars. And all these brand new silver dollars started showing up all over town. He made his point.
Of course, everything goes full circle. He spent his own money that he derived from being a shrewd businessman to gather up these items, and now instead of selling them on and putting the money in his pocket and running away, he's giving it all away to the citizens of Canada.
Excuse me, do you know who Stan Reynolds is?
I don't know him personally, but what I do know is that, you know, he was a pilot and he had a lot to do with the development of the airport here. He had a flying school and he used to sell airplanes and stuff, so without him there probably wouldn't be much for an airport here in Wetaskiwin.
When you're flying in the air, you feel like there's no strain.
My Uncle Stan, my father, my other Uncle Bert all were exposed to airplanes through my grandfather. They joined the Royal Canadian Air Force as soon as they were able to. My mother was an air traffic controller involved with air movements during the war. I've been involved with aviation since I knew what an airplane was. Of course, my children have been involved in it since day one. It's part of who we are. We're airplane people.
I think my father learned from watching his father, and he held him in such high regard.
When he was going through Kansas, he stopped and they had one of the first Cessnas built. He couldn't afford to buy anything expensive, so he bought this airplane, strapped it onto the roof of the Oldsmobile, along with the wings, and he hauled it home on the roof of the Oldsmobile. It had no engine at the time. So he made up an engine for it when he got it, and he took the engine out of a 1908 2-cylinder autocar roadster.
The war sort of was a safety valve for all of us, and in 1940, of course, my oldest brother, he was the first in the lineup to join in the Air Force, and then a couple of years later it was Stan, and then a year after that it was me. You see, it was mainly a way of getting away from home. It wasn't that enjoyable.
Stan was an absolutely excellent pilot. He used to be a mosquito pilot during the war. He crashed in England one time and got pretty well brewed up. He got burned quite badly.
And on one night trip, the starboard engine burst into flame. We got the fire out and feathered the propeller and flew back to base from our patrol on one engine. I didn't want to be discharged from the Air Force. I would preferred to have stayed in the Air Force. And then in 1947, I got a letter from the Air Force wanting me to come back. By that time, 1947, I was doing quite well in my used car lot, so I didn't go back into the Air Force. When I decided that I was in a position to start flying again, which was several years after the war before I could afford to buy a plane, and then I started into the airplane business, took on the Piper franchise. I built the hangar.
He was able, very fortunate to combine his passion for collecting with his passion for flying, for his passion for his business, all in one.
I went there to buy a steam engine. He had a 75 horsepower case, but he wanted $275 for this case. And that was a lot of money in those days for an old steam engine. But he had this Hawker Hurricane out in the pasture, and the cows are walking over the wings. But he only wanted $50 for the Hawker Hurricane, so I bought that.
In today's market, due to the rarity and desirability of that aircraft, of the Hawker Hurricane, it's well over $1 million to purchase brand new.
Stanley promised that he would guarantee us enough aircraft to fill a hangar at no cost to us. They would be just on loan. And that would form the nucleus of an aviation museum.
In 1992, when this facility opened, the museum ended up having aircraft already in the collection, whether coming from various other individuals and organizations. The building originally was for restoration and a storage hangar for aircraft that they would fly.
One of the only museums that I know in Canada that has an aviation museum that fronts on an active runway. Couldn't wish for a better setup.
In '92 as well, we also ended up coming down from Edmonton and joined in with the Reynolds Alberta Museum. The Hall of Fame tells the people aspect, whereas the museum tells the transportation and technological aspect.
Well, I would say that we have the second largest vintage aircraft collection in Canada.
Flip side to that is, when you look at it from the stories aspect, we've had experts from the aviation industry and heritage industry in looking at it and saying it is an amazing collection.
This is the only place that you'll end up finding aircraft and the stories of individuals that ended up flying these aircraft. It's really a mecca of Canadian aviation.
We hope within the next year we'll have the biggest collection in Canada.
You know, a lot of our museums across the country would not be here today if it weren't for people like Byron and Stan. It's that passion, it's that drive that builds these museums and the collections that are in them. So the fanatical aspect, it's great to have that aspect in their personalities.
Yeah. I'll phone you and we'll have lunch at the Legion, and you're going to pay. Now that's a seldom achieved. See, I should have told you that. I don't know how many times we get down to the Legion to have dinner, and he's the member of the Legion. Guess who pays?
Excuse me, can you tell me, do you know who Stan Reynolds is?
Yeah, Mr. Reynolds is a member of our community. He's a former city alderman, and we've worked with him on many developments. He's a great philanthropist in the city and is a well-known gentleman.
If he thought the community needed something and it wasn't getting done, he just threw in.
I was elected to council in 1968, and the city thought they should like to buy Stan Reynolds Airport.
I sold it to him for half the price of raw land, not the value of an airport.
Well, he said, try $13,000. There's 60 acres here, the strip. Yeah, okay. Try 5 years, payments, equal payments, no interest.
At the end of the 5 years, I transferred the airport to them for $1.
That's how I bought the airport. I liked the way he said, try this and try that.
I retained the right to use the airport free of charge as long as we were in the aircraft business. I built the first museum building in 1955.
He wanted to have the largest museum in the world. And you know, really he did have when we had it all together as one piece, before I sold anything, before we donated anything, it was really the largest collection of an assortment of everything.
Because we had put a lot of work in accumulating this collection, we felt that the best way to preserve it would be to give it to the provincial government. And we offered them the collection free of charge.
Our biggest problem was with storage, and it was getting to a point that good quality stuff was being outside. And it got into a panic situation of getting the government to take this museum over. And he lost 10 years over that, trying to donate this museum to the government because he wanted them to take everything.
So it was quantity. We were looking for quality and limited numbers because they have to be displayed.
We established a selection committee that reviewed virtually all of Stan's mechanical collection. And from that, we selected very judiciously pieces that would talk about the themes and messages that we wanted to present here at this museum.
And he had to help them to point out some of the rarest and unusual, because very few people other than Stan Reynolds would know.
They spent 4 years picking out the items that they wanted.
By 1991, we had this amazing facility, and not nearly all of Stan's collection. We took a very small portion of Stan's collection.
I think they didn't take it all because of the cost restoration. There again, like we had probably John Deere tractors, for example. There was over 150 tractors, all identical. Well, nobody needs 150 tractors. I mean, maybe 2, 3 at the most, but not 150.
And looking back now, I think Stan had a vision then of what eventually would happen to what he was gathering up, that he really did have a purpose for it. And it wasn't just hoarding it up and seeing how much he could get. And as it turned out, that's exactly the way it was, because when he offered it to the province, they had their pick out of all the stuff that he had.
One of the things in their agreement with them was that they would restore these units.
So we call this a museum quality restoration. We are not concerned with making vehicles bright and shiny. We are concerned with being able to say to the visitor, this is restored to the condition it was in when it emerged from the factory. We restore to what is period appropriate to the car, or this is the condition this vehicle was in when it came to us, having gone through 10 owners. We've taken it back to that condition. So we're very particular about it, and the skill set required to do that kind of restoration is very particular.
A lot of what we do begins with a sensitivity to the historic material. When an object comes into our shop, we're first going to look at it as a conservation project. We're going to try to intervene as little as possible.
They are very time consuming, they can be very expensive, they can be very unpredictable.
1928 Model A Ford, lots and lots of them around. There's a significant story in automotive history with these cars. These were the cars that came out after the Model T. Very popular. Somewhere around 3 months, we knocked this one right down to the rails and rebuilt it. That was our investment in time. One piece for that Winton car cost more than this whole restoration. This one we did start to finish in a little more than 3 months. The Winton, I'm embarrassed to say, it's 8 years, and we're still not done.
The rate that they're restoring them right now would probably take them 100 years to restore these units.
And that's what a lot of people don't understand about what we do here. We have the 4 areas. We have aviation, we have industry, agriculture, land transportation. But to me, it's not about the machines, it's not about the collecting areas, it's about the stories. And that was what it was about Stan, too. Stan was talking about why these things were significant, why they meant something to him, why they should mean something to other people. It was always about the place in history of these pieces. It wasn't about the pieces themselves, it was about the history that surrounds them at all times.
The museum has had just a huge impact on the community itself. Having this museum here in Wetaskiwin, population 11,000, is amazing, a world-class facility. And that goes beyond our boundaries, but it also pulls us in.
I think the largest component of Stan's happiness right now is to know that his vision, his life's work, What he set out to do to get the provincial government to take on this collection and the caretaking of it, and hopefully the expanding and the perfecting and the fine-tuning of the collection is probably the thing that brings him the greatest joy.
Stan's very active in his donations to the museum, and he says to us all the time, if there's anything you want, just come and get it.
After the government picked out all the units they wanted for the provincial museum, we only purchased vehicles that the government would take.
So I thought, boy, I'm going to have a sale here. So I go to Stan and I said, Stan, I got a guy who's going to give me $100,000 for this Sherman tank. Stan says, no, he says, it's going with our military collection. So, you know, it was not all about money with Stan. He wanted to build up the museum and make it the biggest and impressive museum that you possibly could make.
Now these here, all that you see over here, these are all different models of military vehicles, and they're going to be in the military collection.
He gives so freely of what he has, whether that's expertise or his collections or whatever it is. He wants what he has to be shared by everybody.
He wants to write a book about himself. He wants to. He still wants to buy some more airplanes. He wants to be involved in the restoration of them. He's got so many things he's doing that I don't think he even can figure out what he wants to do first. You know, so it's just, there's no end to him. There's no end to him. And I think that's what keeps him alive. It keeps him going. He hasn't got time to die.
It's the only one we know of left in existence made in Canada. I don't know if I can describe myself, but I maybe jack of all trades or something like that, because I did a lot of things in my lifetime that nobody else would consider doing.
Well, Stan is a guy who had a rudder to him. He knew where he wanted to go.
Determined individual, definite in what he would like to achieve, wrapped up in a small package.
What I've learned from Stan is persistence. Stan is persistent in his vision, persistent in what he wanted. He lobbied the government for so many years, got turned down so many times, but he wasn't going to give up. He was going to have this museum. He was going to have it and give it to the people. And he made it. He made it happen.
I think, I mean, he does things because he's got a purpose. He's driven. Everything has a reason, whether it was his flying that he took up because of the World War, and then he kept an interest in flying, and that led to his restoration for aircraft. And there was a purpose. You know, he's got a fishing award, I think, on his wall from years ago that most people would look at that and wonder what the value, but there was a purpose to what he was doing. And when he hunted, it was always he went out to hunt because the wolves were overpopulated, and so they needed to fly over and shoot some from the airplane. Something always had to have a purpose. It wasn't just, well, you went and did it because it was fun. It was, well, what's the value in that activity, and what does it give back to you in the end?
I mean, he is so pragmatic because he's not idealistic. He just does not look to the clouds and dream things up and then perhaps not pursue them. He just gets something in his mind and he just goes forward.
I go there for an evening just to visit with him for a little while, and he'd be writing at his desk and he'd be talking to me and writing down, and what he was doing, I don't know. But he was doing something that was constructive. He's got a little sign in his house, and it's still sitting there today. He says, if you got nothing to do, don't do it around here.
I wish I knew where he got his drive. If I did know, I would, like I say, I would take a quart of it and I would sprinkle it liberally over top, drink the rest, and then I'd patent it and make $1 million.
He's just a guy. He never went to university. He never did any of that stuff. You know, he was a car salesman. He was a fighter pilot in the war, but he did learn a little bit. He was kind of a Renaissance man. He really did absorb everything around him.
He had a dream and he found a way of making it happen. And he basically lived for that dream. He did. And you know what? He still does.
I was a bad student. In fact, I remember walking up the stairs one time and one of the teachers was walking downstairs, and he met me halfway. And he says, if you miss any more classes, I'm going to wrap this baseball bat around your neck.
I think he did like to compete because he played hockey in high school.
Well, he's quite a orangutan, you know, he's quite an ambitious young fellow. So he had built a race car out of a Model T Ford. There's quite a few of those around central Alberta, and they had race meets every weekend. So he and his father raced with others, and he won a lot of them.
So there was Dad with 3 sons, and just hoping to get by, but he did.
Grandpa Ted, because he was busy, and he just didn't really know how to be a good father all by himself. And he was so very old style.
Dad wasn't much of a cook, so he farmed us out to the club cafe where we took our meals.
He was not a man who did these caregiver type things. So my dad didn't really learn to be a caregiver.
Stan does things that he thinks are important, and usually they aren't personal relationships. They have something to do with getting things done.
It's just, that's his personality. You know, if you haven't got something to talk to him about business-like, or if you haven't got something he wants to buy, the conversation's over.
He never said thank you for many years when dinners were made, Christmas and Easter, Thanksgiving. But lately, if we have him for dinner, we make him his little Mai Tai drink, it's his favorite drink, and he leaves and he says, thank you for dinner. And that doesn't sound like a lot for most people, but coming from my dad, that is the most precious words he could say.
I think maybe Susan and Judy would probably mention that they probably never got a hug from their dad until maybe the last 5 years when they forced him into it. And then he figured it's not that bad.
Well, my relationship with Stan, or you could say my grandpa, is very businesslike. It's employee to boss kind of relationship, which is okay in a way.
He never paid attention to people very much. For example, my son has been working with me even to this day, and he started working with me as a young kid. And when Craig was probably 15, 16, 17 years old, somewhere in there, Stan came into the shop one day and he says to me, he says, who's that young fella you got working there for you? I said, well, Stan, we call him Craig, and that would be your grandson. Oh, he said, out the door he went.
You know, he comes into the shop and it's either you be busy or you stop and talk, and it's always been just be busy. So I've thought about it, and you know, it's always nice to have the idea, you know, you and your grandpa are pretty close, but you know, it's not quite there. It's his personality. It's not what he does, just who he is. So you can admire the passion he has for his love of work and his career. It's just that's his passion.
He was always in a world of his own, busy. Mind was always going on to something. I'm sure a million things was going through his mind every 10 minutes.
You know, Grandpa was always this figure whenever he came. At first, he didn't know how to approach him because he was always very kind of proper about things, and distanced, like older males tend to be from his era. But he always had a lot of value in integrity, doing the right things for the right reasons. You know, if you asked him why he was collecting all this stuff, it was important to him, the restoration and salvaging or saving, I guess, preserving the history in all those antiques and those items. It wasn't just an old rusted out Model T in the bush. It was something to him that had value in the future. And so he always just passed that along to us, that if there were things that you could do that were worth value, he'd be supportive in that. And one of the things he always offered was his grandchildren. He paid for our university education.
Well, it's been a difficult situation working with Stan because he's a perfectionist, a very hard man to please. One of the older fellas that worked with Stan's father, worked for Stan, was still working there when I came. He told me, he says, here's some good advice for you. And he says, don't expect a lot of compliments. I said, okay. And he says, another thing is, he says, if you're restoring something, and he walks in, and he's looking at what you've done, maybe walks around it a couple times and looks at it again, and then walks out, and doesn't say a word to you, he said, there's your compliment.
What I admire about my dad in his relationship with Stan is his dedication and his tolerance and patience with the man. You know, to be tolerant and accept somebody for who they are is a very big thing. So for him to go and do that and not try to change him in one way or the other and just follow in his leadings is very admirable.
It's been rewarding in a lot of ways. I probably, maybe, you know, he brought the best out of me, you know, because I'm the type of person, when I do something, I like to do it right. And of course, that's the only that he would accept it.
No one can quite do it as right as he can.
But there again, I mean, it's the eccentrics that make the world go around. If it wasn't for eccentricity, you know, and I can think of 100 different ones out there, where would we be? You know, it should be a gray old world if we were all the same, you know, slab-sided, you know, everybody thinking at the same level.
He's a humble man, and a lot of people, if they go to Reynolds, Alberta Museum and he happens to be there, they wouldn't recognize him as being anyone special. He doesn't try to stand out in the crowd, but he has done so much for Wetaskiwin over the years that the Canadian government have recognized it with an Order of Canada. This year they're inducting Stan as a member of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame, basically because of his collecting.
The man has the same suit coat that he had, I think, when he got married. So personal luxuries, personal belongings mean absolutely nothing to him. He lives in the same house that he built in the 50s. Only begrudgingly will he ever change vehicles.
I learned the value of integrity and honesty, of family and community. We had a dispute one day in the office, and he said, "You are certainly very pig-headed." And I told him, "Where do you think I learned it from?"
He seems a lot of times for it to be just dollars and cents. I think there's an awful lot more to it than that. I think he's a lot deeper than that.
Do you have any regrets in life?
Oh yeah, I did things that I've regretted. And that happens to people. I remember near Swift Current, Saskatchewan, I was offered a Lysander airplane, and it was complete. The fabric was rotted off it for $250, and it took me a few weeks to decide that I would buy it, because that was a little bit over my limit. And so, but when I phoned the farmer, he had just sold it, and it's now in the Canadian Museum in Ottawa, and that's where it's at. So it got to a good place, but that plane is worth probably close to $1 million now.
I really don't think he realized the legacy that he started. When we look at what we have here, it started from Stan with his collection, and it came here to Wetaskiwin. They built a building. Since that time, we've had hundreds of thousands of visitors. We have donors. There's the sponsors that we have that come through here and sponsor the things we do at the museum. They have to believe in this as well. Our volunteers who come and give, this is all about giving. They give their time, they give their dollars, they give their energy, they give their prized possessions.
I grew up developing a passion for this type of equipment because of my dad's passions for them, and how lucky for me that a family hobby becomes my career. And my wife has an interest in history, and she joins alongside of me quite readily.
Things like that, I think, kind of run along family lines because of the similar interests. That's not nature, but nurture.
I enjoy history, and I've been able to come in contact with a lot of history here, as well as I have been able to wear a lot of costumes, and I've enjoyed that a lot and wouldn't mind going into costume conservation.
It's that they see something in us, that we have a sheer enjoyment of being involved with this, and there's so many people here that are here because they love it and not because it's a way of making a living.
Well, you know how when a plant grows, it grows branches? That's it.
I think one of the reasons that we feel like a family is that the whole idea behind this museum, it started as a family thing. It started from Stan and his collections, from his father, Ted, and down onto his children.
But that Reynolds name is not Stan Reynolds. That really, I give him the name Reynolds as more or less as being the family name.
And then I started going to flea markets and collecting on my own, and of course that bug in the blood came out, and I didn't quit.
In large part, who I am is because of being associated with the man.
Family is very important, and I think that's part of why everybody who comes here just kind of automatically becomes a part of it.
And he doesn't really understand what I'm asking him. How do you want to be remembered? What is it you want to leave behind? I think he simply has to say for himself that I preserved history for people to see for generations and generations to come. That is his way of being immortal.
Once you're gone, people don't pay much attention to people that are gone. So I don't expect anybody to remember me once I leave this world.